The holographic message floated in the center of the command room, its blue light casting strange shadows on the walls. Commander Taemin Park stood perfectly still, his dark eyes scanning the alien text that his computer slowly translated into Korean, then English. Around him, 5 other officers from Earth Defense Force waited in silence. The message was simple. The Galactic Coalition wanted humanity to join them. Taemin read the words again, not quite believing them. For 200 years, humans had wondered if they were alone in the universe. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. A massive ship appeared near Mars, so large it blocked out the sun for 3 full minutes. The aliens inside called themselves the Coalition, a group of 847 different species from across the galaxy. They came in peace. They offered friendship. They offered knowledge, and now they offered something else. A seat at their military academy. "Sir, what does it mean?" asked Hana Kim, a young officer with sharp eyes and quicker instincts. She was 28 years old and had already earned 3 medals for tactical brilliance. "Why do they want us in their military?" Taemin touched the hologram, expanding the text. "They say we've impressed them with our rapid advancement. 50 years ago, we barely had space stations. Now we have FTL drives. They want to see what else we can offer." Another officer, a grizzled Marine named Daewon Lee, laughed bitterly. "They want to see if we're useful. Like auditioning for a club." "Maybe," Taemin admitted. He had fought in 3 wars during his military career. He had seen friends die. He had given orders that sent good people to their deaths. He knew how the universe worked. Nothing was free. But it's also an opportunity. We learn from them. We see how advanced civilizations operate. The meeting ended an hour later. Earth's government made their decision within a week. 50 military personnel would attend the Galactic Military Academy on a planet called Viridian Prime. Taemin would lead them. 2 months later, Taemin stood on the transport deck of a coalition vessel, watching Earth shrink behind them. Beside him, Hana stared at the view screen with wide eyes. "I've never left Earth before," she whispered. "None of us have," Taemin replied. "Not like this." The journey took 3 days, though the coalition captain explained it would have taken human ships 3 years to cover the same distance. Their technology was beyond anything Earth had developed. Everything about them was beyond humanity. Their ships were larger, their weapons more powerful. Their history stretched back 50,000 years. Humans were children compared to them. Viridian Prime appeared on the view screen like a jewel, a planet of deep blue oceans and green continents. Orbiting it was the military academy, a space station so massive it had its own atmosphere. Taemin counted 12 enormous rings, each one rotating slowly, each one larger than any city on Earth. When they docked, an alien waited for them at the airlock. It stood on 6 legs, its body covered in chitinous armor that gleamed under the station's lights. Multiple eyes studied the humans with obvious curiosity. When it spoke, a translator device converted its clicking sounds into perfect Korean. "Welcome to Viridian Academy. I am Instructor Velthari. You are the human delegation, yes?" Taemin stepped forward and saluted. "Commander Taemin Park, Earth Defense Force." Velthari's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Earth Defense Force, how quaint. You defend a single planet. Come, let me show you what real military power looks like." The tour lasted 6 hours. The academy was overwhelming. Training grounds that simulated entire planets, weapons that could destroy cities with a single shot, medical facilities that could regrow limbs in hours, and everywhere thousands of alien cadets from hundreds of different species. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Taemin's mind struggled to process them. Beings made of crystal, creatures that floated in tanks of liquid, things with too many limbs or no limbs at all. But one thing united them all. When they looked at the humans, they smiled, or did whatever their species did to show amusement. Velthari led them to a lecture hall where a dozen other instructors waited. They were of various species, each one physically impressive in their own way. A reptilian being that stood 3 meters tall, a creature covered in feathers and what looked like natural armor, something that seemed to be made of living metal. "We have reviewed your species' military history," said the reptilian instructor, its voice deep and rumbling. "We find it disturbing." Taemin felt Hana tense beside him. Daewon's hand drifted toward his sidearm, though he stopped himself. They were guests here. They had to remember that. Disturbing how? Taemin asked calmly. The instructor activated a hologram. Images appeared pulled from Earth's history. Ancient battles, medieval sieges, modern warfare. The numbers appeared beside each conflict. 10,000 dead, 50,000, a million. Your species fights itself constantly, the instructor said. You wage wars that kill millions of your own kind. This is barbaric, primitive. The Coalition has not seen such savagery in 30,000 years. We've had a difficult history, Taman admitted, keeping his voice steady. Difficult? Vilthari's mandibles clicked rapidly. Your World War II killed over 70 million beings. 70 million. Do you understand what that number means? The Coalition has 847 member species. In the last 1,000 years, our military casualties total less than 2 million across all species combined. The other instructors murmured agreement. One of them, a being that looked like it was made of flowing water, spoke up. We fight with honor. We have rules. Civilized species do not slaughter each other wholesale. We thought you were ready to join us, but now we wonder if you are simply violent animals. Taman felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. He had expected this. He had warned the other humans that the aliens might look down on them. We are not animals, he said quietly. We are survivors. Our history is violent because our world was harsh. We fought each other because we didn't know there was anyone else to fight. We made mistakes. We learned from them. That's why we're here. The reptilian instructor looked at him for a long moment. Then it gestured to a door. You will be given quarters. Tomorrow orientation begins. You will learn how civilized species conduct warfare, and perhaps we will learn if humans can evolve beyond their savage past. The humans were dismissed. As they walked through the corridors to their quarters, nobody spoke. Taman could feel the shame and anger radiating from his people. They had come here hoping to be equals. Instead, they were treated like primitives. That night, Taman couldn't sleep. He stood by the window in his small room, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, impossibly far away. He wondered if they had made a mistake coming here. A message arrived on his personal communicator. It was from the Academy's director, an alien called Praetor Zendril. The message was brief. Commander Park, the Coalition has decided to utilize your expertise. You will teach a course on human military tactics. We believe it will be educational for our cadets to see how primitive warfare is conducted. Your first class begins in 3 days. We have taken the liberty of assigning you a title, the Death Count Instructor. It reflects your species' unfortunate focus on casualties rather than honor. Taman read the message 3 times. They meant it as an insult, a way to mock humanity's bloody history. But as he stared at those words, something changed inside him. They wanted to see how humans fought. They wanted to understand death counts. He would teach them. He would show them exactly what humanity had survived, what humanity had learned, and maybe, just maybe, they would stop smiling. The lecture hall was enormous, designed to hold 500 students. Only 200 had shown up for Taman's first class. He stood at the front watching as alien cadets filed in, chattering and laughing among themselves. They looked at him the way university students might look at a guest speaker they didn't particularly want to hear. Hana sat in the back row, her face carefully neutral. Beside her, Daewon crossed his arms and scowled at the aliens. They were there as teaching assistants, but really, they were there for moral support. Taman appreciated it more than he would ever say. A cadet in the front row, a reptilian being with golden scales, leaned over to his neighbor. The Death Count Instructor, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I heard he's going to tell us scary stories about humans killing each other. Laughter rippled through the room. Taman waited for it to die down. When it didn't, he activated the holographic projector. The image that appeared was simple. A map of Earth circa 1939. My name is Commander Taman Park, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. The translator devices ensured every species heard him in their own language. I am here to teach you about human military history. Specifically, I'm going to tell you about a war we call World War II. A cadet near the middle, a being made of blue crystal that refracted light in strange patterns, raised what might have been a hand. Instructor, we've reviewed the casualty figures. Surely those numbers are exaggerated for dramatic effect. They are not, Taman replied flatly. He changed the image. Now it showed numbers: 70 million dead, 25 million military casualties, 45 million civilian deaths. The lecture hall went quiet. This war lasted 6 years, Taman continued. It involved most of the nations on our planet. By the time it ended, entire cities had been destroyed. Millions had starved. Millions more had been systematically murdered. A cadet stood up abruptly. It was the golden-scaled reptilian from earlier. His name tag identified him as Thexelar. This is impossible. No species could sustain such losses and continue fighting. Your planet's population would have collapsed. Earth's population in 1939 was approximately 2 billion, Taemin said. We lost 3.5% of our entire species in 6 years. And yes, we continued fighting. Thexelar shook his head. My people have been members of the coalition for 6,000 years. In all that time, we have lost exactly 4,312 soldiers. That's across 6 millennia. You're telling me humans lost more than that in a single day? Taemin changed the image again. Now it showed a beach, bodies in the water, destroyed vehicles, smoke rising from the sand. This is D-Day, he said quietly. June 6, 1944. Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy to begin the liberation of Europe from Nazi occupation. In the first 24 hours, we suffered approximately 10,000 casualties. By the end of the operation, over 400,000 people were dead, wounded, or missing. The silence in the room was absolute. Taemin could see confusion on the faces that were capable of showing expressions. Horror on others. A voice spoke up from the back. It was Bryn, a crystalline being who was considered one of the top tactical students in the academy. Why would you accept such losses? Why not negotiate? Why not surrender? Taemin looked at her directly. Because the alternative was worse. The Nazi regime was systematically exterminating entire populations. They had killed 6 million Jews along with millions of others they deemed inferior. If we had negotiated, if we had surrendered, those deaths would have continued. But your own losses, Bryn insisted. Surely at some point the cost becomes too high. Does it? Taemin asked. He gestured to Daewon, who stood and walked to the front. The Marine had a scar running down the left side of his face, a souvenir from the Mars Rebellion 15 years ago. This is Daewon Lee, Taemin said. He fought in our most recent major conflict. Daewon, tell them about the siege of Olympus Station. Daewon looked uncomfortable being the center of attention, but he spoke clearly. We were defending a civilian colony. 15,000 people, mostly families. The rebels wanted the station because of its strategic position. They outnumbered us 4-1. How many defenders? Asked Thexelar. 200 Marines, Daewon replied. By the time reinforcements arrived 3 weeks later, 41 of us were still alive and combat capable. Another 73 were wounded but survived. The rest died holding the line. The golden-scaled cadet looked appalled. 40% casualties? Your unit should have broken, should have retreated. We couldn't retreat, Daewon said simply. The civilians had nowhere to go, so we stayed, we fought. And when the rebels finally pulled back, all 15,000 civilians were still alive. Taemin watched the impact of those words sink in. These aliens had been raised in a culture where losing even a few soldiers was considered a tragedy. Where wars were fought with strict rules and honor codes, where the goal was never complete victory, but acceptable compromise. They had never faced an enemy that fought to the last breath. They had never had to make the choice between dying and losing everything. You asked why we accept such losses, Taemin said, addressing the entire class. The answer is simple. We fight because we must. Because surrender means death, slavery, or extinction. Because sometimes there is no third option. He brought up another image. This one showed a city reduced to rubble. This is Hiroshima after we dropped an atomic bomb on it. 70,000 people died instantly. Another 70,000 died from radiation over the following months. Gasps filled the room. A cadet near the front stood up and walked out looking physically ill. We created a weapon that could destroy entire cities. Taemin continued. We used it twice. And do you know what happened next? The war ended. Japan surrendered. We had killed hundreds of thousands with 2 bombs, but in doing so, we prevented a land invasion that would have killed millions more. That's monstrous, Bryn whispered. Yes, Taemin agreed. It is. War is monstrous. That's something humans learned thousands of years ago. But here's the thing about monsters. Sometimes you need to become one to stop a greater evil. Thexelar stood up again, his scales flushing darker. This is barbaric. The coalition would never accept such tactics. We have rules. We have honor. We fight with dignity. And what happens, Taemin asked quietly, when you face an enemy who doesn't care about your rules? Who doesn't want dignity? Who just wants to win? The golden-scaled cadet opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He had no answer. Taman spent the next hour walking them through more of human history. The trenches of World War I, the siege of Stalingrad, the firebombing of Dresden, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, conflict after conflict, each one teaching humans new and terrible lessons about warfare. By the end of the class, half the seats were empty. The cadets who remained looked shaken. They had come expecting to laugh at primitive humans. Instead, they had seen something that terrified them, the capacity for absolute unrelenting warfare. As the last students filed out, Bryn approached the podium. She looked at Taemin with what might have been respect. "Instructor, I have a question." "Go ahead. How do you live with it? Knowing what your species has done? Knowing what you're capable of?" Taemin was quiet for a moment. It was a question he had asked himself many times over the years. "We remember," he finally said. "We build monuments. We teach our children. We carry the weight of our history so that hopefully, maybe, we can avoid repeating it. But we also understand something important." "What's that?" "That sometimes survival requires terrible choices. And someone has to be willing to make them." Bryn nodded slowly and left. Hana and Daewon came down from the back row. Hana looked worried. "Half the class walked out," she said. "The academy isn't going to like this." "I don't care what they like," Taemin replied. They wanted to know how humans fight. Now they know. That evening, Taemin was summoned to Praetor Zendril's office. The director was a tall, elegant being covered in fine silver fur. It sat behind a desk made of what looked like living wood, its expression unreadable. "Commander Park," it said, "your first lesson was disturbing to many students. I taught them what they asked to learn. You taught them horror." Zendril leaned forward. "The Coalition has maintained peace for 50,000 years precisely because we moved past such barbarism. Your methods are antiquated, crude. We evolved beyond them." Taemin met the director's gaze without flinching. "Then I hope for your sake that you never meet an enemy who hasn't evolved." Zendril stared at him for a long moment. Then it waved a hand dismissively. "Continue your classes. But understand, Commander, that the Coalition will never adopt your brutal philosophies. We are better than that." As Taemin left the office, he felt a cold certainty settling in his chest. These aliens were so confident in their superiority, so certain that their way was the only way. He hoped they were right, because if they were wrong, the cost would be measured in millions of lives. The emergency alert came 3 months into the human delegation's stay at the academy. Taemin was reviewing lesson plans when his communicator began screaming urgent warnings in multiple languages. Red lights flashed throughout the station. An automated voice repeated the same message over and over. "Code Crimson. All personnel report to emergency stations. Code Crimson." Taemin ran to the command center where he found chaos. Dozens of instructors and senior officers crowded around holographic displays, their voices rising in panic. Praetor Zendril stood at the center, its silver fur bristling with obvious distress. "What's happening?" Taemin demanded. Instructor Velthari turned to him, its mandibles clicking rapidly. "Attack on Talvos 3, a border world. 4 million colonists. They're being slaughtered." The main display showed footage from the planet's surface. It was carnage. Massive creatures tore through cities, their armored bodies shrugging off weapons fire. They moved with terrifying speed and purpose, killing everything in their path. Buildings collapsed. Fires raged. The screaming was constant. "Who are they?" Taemin asked. "We don't know," Zendril said, its voice shaking. "They came from beyond the galactic rim. Our sensors detected nothing until they were already in orbit. They're not responding to any communication. They just attack." Taemin watched the footage grimly. The creatures were huge, at least 3 meters tall, covered in thick natural armor. They moved on 4 legs but could rear up on their hind limbs to use their front claws as weapons. Their heads were mostly mouth, filled with rows of jagged teeth. "The Coalition fleet is mobilizing," Velthari said. 10,000 soldiers from 12 different species. Best equipment. Best training. They'll retake the planet within a week. Taemin said nothing. He had seen enough battles to know that confidence often died first. The Coalition force arrived at Talvos 3 within 36 hours. Taemin watched their deployment from the Academy's command center. Everything was done by the book. Ships in perfect formation, landing craft deploying in organized waves, soldiers establishing defensive perimeters with practiced precision. It was beautiful. It was textbook military doctrine. It was completely wrong for this situation. The creatures, which the coalition was calling devourers for their savage feeding behavior, didn't follow any known tactical patterns. They didn't establish supply lines. They didn't retreat to regroup. They simply attacked, again and again with suicidal ferocity. Within 12 hours, the coalition forces were in trouble. Within 24, they were in full retreat. Tamian watched Commander Raltus, the coalition fleet commander, give increasingly desperate orders. The aliens were brave, he had to give them that. They fought with honor and discipline, but every time their casualties reached even 2 or 3%, units would pull back. It was ingrained in their culture. High casualties meant something had gone wrong. It meant you retreated and reassessed, but the Devourers didn't care about reassessment. They cared about killing. "We need to evacuate," Raltus said on the third day, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "We've lost 600 soldiers." 600? This is unsustainable. Tamian did the math in his head. 600 out of 10,000. 6% casualties. The coalition was retreating after losing 6%. On Earth, units often fought until they lost 40% or more. "Praetor," Tamian said quietly, "let me send a message to Earth. We can help." Zendril turned to him, its expression desperate. "Your people have no experience with alien threats. You've only fought each other." "Exactly," Tamian replied, "and we're very good at fighting." The evacuation was a disaster. Coalition forces managed to save about 2 million civilians, but the rest were trapped on the surface. The Devourers showed no mercy. They tore through refugee centers and hospitals with the same ferocity they showed military targets. The footage that reached the academy was nightmare fuel. Tamian forced himself to watch it all. He needed to understand what they were facing. In one clip, a group of crystalline soldiers made a defensive stand to buy time for civilians to evacuate. They fought bravely, using sophisticated weapons and coordinated tactics. But when their casualties reached 15%, they broke. They ran. Not because they were cowards, but because their entire culture screamed at them that 15% losses meant total defeat. The Devourers pursued them. Killed them all. Then killed the civilians they had been protecting. Jiwoo Choi, a human medic who had volunteered for the evacuation force, sent back a desperate message. She was 26 years old, barely older than some of the students Tamian taught. Her voice was hoarse from screaming orders over the sound of gunfire. "They don't know how to fight a real war," she said, her face covered in dust and blood. "They panic when they lose a few people. They freeze when things get bad. Send help, please. These people are dying because their soldiers don't understand that sometimes you have to hold the line even when it's hopeless." The message ended with an explosion in the background. The feed went dark. The Coalition Council met an emergency session. Tamian was invited, though he suspected it was only because they were desperate. The council chamber was a massive hall filled with representatives from hundreds of species. They argued in dozens of languages, their translator devices struggling to keep up. "We must sue for peace," one representative said. "Offer them territory, resources, anything to stop the killing." "We tried," another replied. "They don't respond to communication. I'm not even sure they're intelligent enough to negotiate." "Then we retreat," a third suggested. "Abandon the border worlds. Establish a defensive line further in." Tamian stood up. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. "With respect," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Retreating won't work. These Devourers don't want territory. They want prey. If you retreat, they'll follow. They'll keep following until you have nowhere left to run." "And what would you suggest, human?" Zendril asked coldly. "Your brutal tactics? Your acceptance of mass casualties?" "Yes," Tamian said simply. "Because the alternative is extinction." The chamber erupted in angry shouts. Aliens stood, gesturing wildly, their voices rising in outrage. The idea that they should adopt human methods was apparently more offensive than losing entire worlds. But not everyone was offended. In the back of the chamber, a few representatives stayed quiet. They looked thoughtful. Scared but thoughtful, one of them stood. It was General Sun Hee Nam, the Earth representative on the Coalition Council. She was 52 years old, a veteran of the Mars Rebellion, and she had more combat experience than everyone else in the room combined. "Earth offers military assistance," she said formally. "We will send forces to Talvos 3. We will hold the line." "With what?" Belthari demanded. You have no fleet. No army large enough to matter. We'll send what we can, Sun He replied. 2,000 Marines. It's all we can spare while keeping Earth defended. But I guarantee you those 2,000 will do more damage than your 10,000. The chamber fell silent. 2,000 soldiers against an enemy that had crushed 10,000. It seemed laughable. Sandril looked at Sun He for a long moment. Then it nodded slowly. Very well. We accept your offer, but understand, General Nam. When your people die on Talvos 3, their blood will be on your hands. Sun He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Director, I've had blood on my hands since I was 19 years old. I know the weight of it. The question is, can you handle the weight of letting millions die because you're too proud to accept help? The vote was close, but it passed. Earth would send military forces to join the coalition defense. Taemin met with Sun He after the session. She looked tired, the weight of her decision already showing on her face. 2,000 Marines, Taemin said, against an enemy we know almost nothing about. I know, Sun He replied. But we don't have a choice. If the Devourers break through the coalition, they'll eventually reach Earth. Better to stop them now. The coalition observers are going to watch us fail. They're going to watch us die. Sun He looked at him with steel in her eyes. Then we'd better make sure we win. Because if we don't, humanity's reputation in this galaxy is finished before it even begins. The human forces arrived at Talvos 3 1 week later. Taemin watched their deployment from the academy. Unlike the coalition forces, they didn't establish defensive perimeters. They didn't set up bases in safe zones. They went on the offensive. Commander Raltus, still traumatized from his retreat, watched in horror as human soldiers advanced directly toward Devourer positions. They're going to be slaughtered, he whispered. But Taemin watched the tactical display with something like pride. The humans weren't charging blindly. They were using terrain, moving in small, fast units, hitting the Devourers from unexpected angles and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. It was warfare as humans understood. The brutal, efficient, relentless. The first major engagement happened at Talvos City, where 300,000 civilians were trapped. Human Marines, led by Captain Bora Shin, launched a night raid on the Devourer positions surrounding the city. They used explosives, sniper fire, and close-quarters combat. They didn't try to hold ground. They just killed as many Devourers as possible and then retreated. The Devourers, for the first time since they had arrived, pulled back. The siege of Talvos City lasted 3 weeks. By human standards, it was a short campaign. By coalition standards, it was an eternity of horror. General Sun He Nam stood in the makeshift command center, a partially destroyed building that still had power and communications. Around her, holographic displays showed the battle positions. Red dots for Devourers, blue for human forces. The red vastly outnumbered the blue. Status report, she said calmly, as if she was asking about the weather. Captain Bora Shin, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood, looked up from a tactical display. Perimeter holding on the north and east sides. West side took heavy damage 2 hours ago. We've pulled back 3 blocks. South side is stable for now. Casualties? 437 dead. 612 wounded, of which 300 are still combat capable. Sun He did the math without hesitation. They had started with 2,000 Marines. They were now at just over 50% combat effectiveness. In coalition terms, that meant total defeat. In human terms, it meant they were still fighting. Across the city in bombed-out buildings and makeshift fortifications, human soldiers held positions that should have been impossible to defend. They fought in shifts, sleeping in 3-hour rotations, eating rations while standing watch. They had been fighting for 21 days straight. Private Hyunwoo Kang crouched behind a pile of rubble, his rifle trained on the street ahead. He was 21 years old, young enough that some people back on Earth still called him a kid. He had started a video blog before the deployment, thinking it would be exciting to document humanity's first alien combat. Now his camera was covered in blood, and his hands shook when he wasn't holding a weapon. Movement, whispered the Marine next to him, a woman named Sora from Seoul. 3 o'clock, Hyunwoo saw it. A devourer, massive and deadly, moving through the ruins. Its armor was scarred from previous battles, but it showed no signs of slowing down. Behind it, 3 more appeared. Hold, Sora said quietly. Wait for them to get closer. The Devourers moved into the kill zone. Sora counted down from 3 with her fingers. When she reached 0, the entire squad opened fire. The Devourers roared and charged. They were fast. Impossibly fast for their size. But humans had learned their patterns. Hyunwoo aimed for the joints in their armor, the weak points that Bo-Ra's team had identified during the first week. His shots found their mark. One Devourer stumbled. Another fell. But the third reached their position. It swung a massive claw and the world exploded into chaos. When the dust settled, 2 Marines were dead. One was dying. The Devourer was finally down, its body riddled with bullets and explosive charges. Sora pressed her hand to a wound on her side, blood seeping between her fingers. Report to command. Position held. 3 casualties. 1 enemy killed. Request medical and reinforcements. Hyunwoo made the call, his voice surprisingly steady. This was the routine now. Fight. Die. Report. Repeat. At the academy, Taemin watched the battle reports with growing concern. The humans were winning, but the cost was staggering. Every day brought new casualty lists. Every engagement meant more names added to the growing memorial. The alien cadets watched with him now. His classes had changed since Talvos 3. The mockery was gone. Now they attended in silence, trying to understand how humans could function at such losses. Thexelar, the golden-scaled cadet who had once walked out of Taemin's lecture, now sat in the front row. He watched footage of human soldiers holding a bridge against 20 Devourers. The squad of 12 humans fought until only 3 remained. But they held the bridge. They bought time for civilians to evacuate. How? Thexelar asked quietly. How do they keep fighting when they know they're going to die? Taemin looked at the young cadet. Because someone has to. Because if they break, everyone behind them dies. So they hold. Even when it's hopeless. Especially when it's hopeless. Bryn, the crystalline student, had started attending every class and watching every battle report. She took notes constantly, trying to analyze human tactics. It's not just their willingness to die, she said. It's how they adapt. Look at this. She brought up footage from a battle 3 days ago. A human squad had encountered Devourers in an area with no cover. Instead of retreating, they had rigged explosives to a building and collapsed it on top of the enemy. 7 humans died in the explosion, but they took 30 Devourers with them. Coalition doctrine would never allow that. Bryn continued, sacrificing soldiers to multiply the enemy casualties. It's too brutal, too calculating. It's also effective, Taemin replied. War isn't about being civilized. It's about winning. On Talvos 3, Sunhee made a decision. The Devourers were concentrating their forces for a massive assault on the city. Intelligence suggested they were bringing in thousands more. The city couldn't hold against those numbers, so they would attack first. She called Bo-Ra into the command center. The captain looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. I need you to take your best people and hit their staging area, deep behind their lines, cause as much damage as possible. Bo-Ra studied the map. The staging area was 15 kilometers into Devourer-controlled territory. Getting there would be suicide. Getting back would be impossible. How many do you need? She asked. 50 volunteers, no more. I need the rest to hold the city. Bo-Ra nodded. She didn't ask about extraction plans. She didn't ask about survival chances. She understood the mission. I'll have my team ready in 2 hours. Bo-Ra, Sunhee said quietly. This is a one-way trip. The captain smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. General, every trip is one way until it isn't. We'll do our best. The raid launched at 0200 hours. 50 humans carrying every explosive device they could carry infiltrated Devourer territory. They moved like ghosts through the ruins, avoiding patrols, killing sentries silently. They reached the staging area just before dawn. What they found was worse than expected. Not thousands of Devourers, tens of thousands, maybe more, all preparing for a final assault that would crush the human defensive positions. Bo-Ra made her decision in seconds. Plant everything, every charge, every grenade. Set them for remote detonation. We're going to make this hurt. The humans spread out, placing explosives throughout the enemy camp. They worked for 30 minutes, moving carefully, knowing that discovery meant death. Private Hyunwoo planted his last charge under what looked like a command structure. His hands had stopped shaking. He had stopped being scared somewhere around day 15. Now he just did his job. Charges set, Bo-Ra whispered into the comm. All units pull back to extraction point. But as they retreated, a Devourer patrol spotted them. The alarm went up. Suddenly, hundreds of Devourers were converging on their position. "Blow it," Sun He ordered from the command center. "Blow it now." Bora looked at her team. They were scattered across the enemy camp, nowhere near the safe distance. She looked at Hyunwoo, at Sora, at the 47 other brave souls who had volunteered for this mission. "It's been an honor," she said simply. Then she triggered the detonation. The explosion lit up the night like a second sun. At the academy, sensors registered an energy release equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. When the light faded, the Devourer staging area was gone. Just gone. A crater where thousands of enemies had been. Casualty report came in minutes later. 50 human soldiers confirmed killed in action. Estimated enemy casualties, 35,000. The command center at the academy was silent. Even Zendril, who had opposed human involvement, stared at the numbers in shock. 50 humans had killed 35,000 Devourers, a 700 to 1 kill ratio. Thexlar stood up slowly. "They knew," he whispered. "They knew they were going to die, and they went anyway." "Yes," Taman said quietly. "That's what it means to be human. Sometimes you have to walk into hell knowing you won't walk back out." On Talvos 3, the Devourer assault never came. Their forces were broken, disorganized. Without their staging area, without their command structure, they began to pull back. Sun He didn't give them time to regroup. She ordered every human unit to advance. They pushed forward through territory soaked in blood, human and alien alike. They drove the Devourers back kilometer by kilometer. 2 weeks later, the last Devourer ship fled Talvos 3. The planet was retaken. The cost was horrific. 863 human soldiers dead, over 1,200 wounded. Of the original 2,000 Marines, only 400 were still fully combat capable. By coalition standards, it was a catastrophic defeat. The human force had been reduced to less than 25% effectiveness, but they had won. Commander Raltus, who had retreated with his force mostly intact, couldn't comprehend it. He stood on the bridge of his ship, watching human soldiers raise Earth's flag over Talvos City. They looked like walking dead, covered in bandages, limping on injured legs, but still standing. "Still fighting. How?" he asked Taman, who had come to observe the aftermath. "How did they survive?" Taman looked at the tired, bloody Marines. He saw Jiwoo working on wounded soldiers, her hands steady despite days without sleep. He saw Hyunwoo sitting on a pile of rubble, finally recording his video blog again, tears running down his face. "They survived because they had to," Taman said. "Because giving up wasn't an option. Because humans learned a long time ago that sometimes survival means paying." 1 year after the Battle of Talvos 3, the Galactic Military Academy looked different. The elegant hallways still gleamed with polished metal, but now they were covered with memorial plaques, names in hundreds of languages, soldiers from dozens of species who had died learning to fight like humans. Taman walked through the main training hall, watching alien cadets run obstacle courses that would have been unthinkable a year ago. A reptilian soldier crawled through mud under live fire. A crystalline being carried a wounded teammate across rough terrain despite her own injuries. A floating gaseous entity practiced close-quarters combat in a containment suit. They looked exhausted, bloodied, pushed, beyond what their species thought. "Possible they looked like soldiers, Director." "Park," called a voice behind him. Taman turned to see Thexlar, now wearing the rank insignia of a coalition captain. The golden-scaled alien had changed. Where once there had been arrogance, now there was a quiet confidence born from real combat experience. "Captain," Taman acknowledged, "shouldn't you be preparing for deployment? I wanted to speak with you first." Thexlar walked beside him, his movements more measured than before. "My unit ships out to the frontier worlds tomorrow. 3rd defensive line against potential Devourer incursions. How's your team?" "Scared, determined. They know what we're facing now. We've trained them the human way. Long deployments, accepting casualties, fighting even when the situation seems hopeless." He paused. "Some of them won't come back." "No," Taman agreed quietly. "Some won't." They walked in silence for a moment. Finally, Thexlar spoke again. "A year ago, I thought your people were savages. I laughed at the death count instructor. Now I understand. You weren't teaching us to count deaths. You were teaching us that some things are worth dying for." Taman nodded. Good luck out there, Captain. After Thexelar left, Taemin continued to his office. The room was larger now, befitting his position as Director of Advanced Warfare, but he had kept it simple. A desk, a chair, and one wall covered in photographs. They were all humans. All the soldiers who had died at Talvos 3. 863 faces staring back at him. Bora Shin, smiling in her academy graduation photo. Zora, who had held her position until the last. Every single one of them, Hana entered without knocking. She wore an admiral's uniform now, her promotion earned through the complete restructuring of coalition military doctrine. The council meeting is in 10 minutes. They want your assessment of the new defensive deployments. I'll be there. Taemin gestured to the photos. Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing? Teaching them to fight like us? Hana studied the memorial wall. Every day. But then I remember the alternative. If we hadn't taught them, the Devourers would have swept through the coalition. Billions would have died. At least this way they have a chance. At what cost? Taemin asked. The coalition had maintained peace for 50,000 years. We changed that in 12 months. They maintained peace because nobody challenged them, Hana countered. The universe doesn't care about their peace. It never did. The council chambers were tense. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, their expressions worried. On the main display, a star map showed red markers spreading along the galactic rim. Devourer sightings, attacks, probing raids, they were coming back. Praetor Zendril called the meeting to order. Director Park has prepared an assessment of our defensive capabilities. Director? Taemin stood, activating his presentation. Numbers and charts appeared, showing force deployments, casualty projections, and strategic recommendations. The Devourers are testing our defenses, he began. These aren't random attacks. They're learning our response times, our tactics, our weaknesses. I estimate we have 6 months before they launch a full-scale invasion. Murmurs of concern rippled through the chamber. Taemin continued. In the past year, we've trained 50,000 coalition soldiers in human warfare doctrine. They've completed advanced combat courses, extended deployment simulations, and psychological conditioning to function at high casualty rates. They're as ready as we can make them. And what are the projected casualties? Asked a representative from the aquatic species, its voice synthesized through a translation device. Taemin didn't hesitate. If the Devourers attack as expected across 200 worlds simultaneously, we're looking at 300,000 military casualties. Maybe more. The chamber erupted. Representatives stood, shouting in dozens of languages. 300,000 dead was unthinkable. The coalition had lost fewer soldiers in 1,000 years than Taemin was predicting for a single campaign. Order, Zendril commanded. When the noise died down, it looked at Taemin with tired eyes. And if we don't adopt your recommendations? If we return to traditional coalition warfare, then civilian casualties will reach the billions, Taemin said flatly. The Devourers don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. You can either fight them with everything you have, or you can watch your worlds burn. A representative from a feline species stood. This is madness. We're becoming as savage as the enemy. Where does it end? Before Taemin could respond, another voice spoke up. It was Bryn, the crystalline being who had been one of his first students. She now held a position as a tactical advisor to the council. It ends when we survive, she said firmly. I've studied Commander Park's methods for a year. I've watched the recordings from Talvos 3 dozens of times. Yes, the human approach is brutal. Yes, the casualties are horrifying. But they work. And when the alternative is extinction, I choose survival. Other voices joined hers. Not all, but enough. The galaxy was changing. The soft civilizations that had known only peace were learning to be hard. The vote came down to a simple question. Adopt full human military doctrine, or maintain traditional coalition warfare with modifications. The result was close, but it passed. The coalition would fight like humans. That evening, Taemin found Jiwoo in the medical training facility. She was teaching a class of alien medical students how to perform field surgery under combat conditions. The students looked uncomfortable with the simulated injuries, the blood, the chaos. Again, Jiwoo said firmly. You have 3 minutes to stabilize this patient before the next casualty arrives. Move faster. Think faster. In real combat, you won't have time to be gentle. When the class ended, she joined Taemin outside. They walked to the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. I heard the council voted yes, she said. We're really doing this. We don't have a choice. Jiwoo was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about Talvos 3, about all the people we couldn't save. I wonder if there was another way. There wasn't, Taemin said. I've thought about it every day for a year. There was no other way. That doesn't make it easier. No, he agreed. It doesn't. 6 months later, the Devourers came. 200 worlds simultaneously, just as Taemin had predicted. The Coalition deployed its forces, now trained and equipped for human-style warfare. The battles were brutal. Cities burned, ships exploded, soldiers died by the thousands, but the line held. On a planet called Varix, Captain Thexlar led a defense of a major population center. His force of 500 took 80% casualties over 3 weeks. But they held. The civilians evacuated. The city survived. On another world, Bryn commanded a fleet action against superior Devourer forces. She lost 40 ships out of 100, but she destroyed their invasion armada and saved the planet. Across 200 worlds, the story repeated. High casualties, desperate battles, but victories, real victories. The war lasted 8 months. When the last Devourer ship retreated beyond the Galactic Rim, the Coalition had lost 264,000 soldiers. It was the bloodiest conflict in 50,000 years of Coalition history. It was also a complete victory. Taemin stood in the Academy's Memorial Hall, looking at the new wall of names. So many names. Humans, yes, but also hundreds of alien species. They had learned to fight like humans. They had learned to die like humans. They had learned to win like humans. Hana found him there, as she often did. The casualty reports are final. 264,000 Coalition dead. Estimated enemy casualties, 3.2 million. Taemin closed his eyes. And how many would have died if we hadn't changed our tactics? Analysis suggests the Coalition would have lost within the first month. Civilian deaths alone would have exceeded 50 billion. That's supposed to make me feel better. Hana put a hand on his shoulder. It's supposed to remind you why we did this. We saved billions by teaching thousands to fight and die. It's horrible mathematics, but it's the only mathematics that matters. A group of students entered the Memorial Hall, led by young cadets from a dozen different species. They stood before the wall of names, paying respects to those who had fallen. One of them, a young reptilian not much older than Hyunwoo had been, stepped forward and placed a small crystal at the base of the memorial. For those who taught us to be strong, he said quietly. Taemin watched them leave, then turned back to the names on the wall. He found Bora's name, Sora's. All 863 humans from Talvos 3, and beside them the names of Coalition soldiers who had died in the recent war. Different species, different worlds, but united by one thing. They had all learned that survival sometimes required terrible sacrifice.